Picture this: the greatest conqueror the world has ever known, standing alone on a platform facing 10,000 battle-hardened warriors who once would have died for him. But today they're screaming for his blood. This is Opis, 324 BC. And what happens next will either save Alexander's empire or destroy it forever. One man, one speech, and a mutiny that nearly tore history apart. August 324 BC, the city of Opis on the Tigris River. For 10 brutal years, the Macedonian army has marched across the known world. They've crossed burning deserts, scaled impossible mountains, and defeated every enemy that dared to face them. They've carved out the largest empire the world has ever seen, stretching from Greece to India. But now, something has changed. The men who bled for Alexander feel betrayed. He wears Persian robes, he's married Persian wives, he's trained 30,000 Persian youths to fight like Macedonians, calling them the successors. And now, at Opis, Alexander announces he's sending home the wounded and elderly veterans with generous pensions. To Alexander, this is a gift. To his men, this is the final insult. They've seen through his generosity. He doesn't need them anymore, he has his Persians now, and so 10,000 voices rise as one, not in loyalty, but in fury. The air at Opis is thick with rage. The Macedonian veterans begin to shout, not cheers, accusations. The king has abandoned them. The king has become Persian. Then comes the ultimate insult, shouted loud enough for all to hear. Go on your campaign with your father. They're mocking him, calling on Ammon, the Egyptian god Alexander claims is his divine father. It's treason dressed in sarcasm. It's mutiny wrapped in contempt. Alexander's legendary temper explodes. He leaps from the platform and charges into the crowd, pointing out the ringleaders with his own finger. 13 men. His elite bodyguards seize them. There's no trial, no mercy, just cold, immediate justice. Alexander orders them executed on the spot, and it happens. 13 men who survived years of war die at their own king's command. The army watches in stunned, horrified silence. Alexander climbs back onto the platform. His chest heaves with rage. The silence is absolute. Every eye is on him. Every heart beats with fear, shame, or defiance. This is the moment. Not a battle won by swords, but by words. And what Alexander says next will either save his empire or destroy it forever.
What I'm about to say isn't meant to stop you returning home. As far as I care, you can go wherever you wish. But I want you to know how you have behaved towards me, and how I have treated you. I'll begin, as is right, with my father, Philip. When he found you, you were mere peasants, wearing hides, tending a few sheep on the mountain slopes, and you could barely defend them from your neighbors. Under him, you began living in cities with good laws and customs, and he turned you from slaves into rulers over those very barbarians who used to plunder your land. He conquered most of Thrace, taking the best harbors so there was trade and prosperity, and put the mines to steady work. The Thessalians, they used to terrify you. Well, we rule them now. The Athenians and Thebans, always looking for a chance to attack Macedonia, were so humbled, myself playing my small part in the war, that they no longer take tribute from Macedonia, but instead depend on us for their protection. My father went to the Peloponnese and put their house in order. Then he was declared supreme commander of all the Greeks for the campaign against the Persians, an honor not just for himself, but for all Macedonians.
Philip made Macedonia great, but Alexander knows his father's achievements, as legendary as they were, pale before what he himself has delivered. And now he reminds them,
"This is what my father Philip did for you. Great enough on its own, but small compared to what you've gained from me. I crossed the Hellespont, even though back then the Persians still commanded the sea. I defeated the satraps of the great King Darius and made you rulers of Ionia, Aeolis, Phrygia, and Lydia, and took Miletus by siege. The rest of the land surrendered willingly, and their wealth became yours. All the riches of Egypt and Cyrene, which I won without a fight, are yours now. Syria, Palestine, Mesopotamia, Babylonia, all belong to you. The wealth of Lydia, the treasures of Persia, the jewels of India and the outer sea. You are now satraps, you are generals and captains. What have I held back for myself, apart from this purple cloak and diadem? Nothing. No man can point to my riches, only the things I hold in trust for you all. And what would I do with them anyway? I eat what you eat. I get no more rest than you. Many times I spent the night on watch so that you could sleep soundly. Who among you believes he's worked harder for me than I have for him?
And then Alexander does something that silences every man in that field. He tears open his tunic and shows them his body, mapped with scars, evidence of every wound he's taken leading them to glory. And he issues a challenge.
Come on, if you've got scars, strip and show them to me. I'll show you mine. There isn't one part of my body, the front at least, that doesn't bear a wound. My body's covered in scars from every weapon you can think of. Swords, arrows, stones, clubs. All for the sake of your lives, your glory and your wealth. And yet here I still am, leading you, as conqueror of land and sea, rivers, mountains and the plains. We've celebrated our weddings together. Many of your children will be cousins of my own. I've paid off your debts without asking how you got them, even though you're paid well enough and pillage every city we take. Many of you wear golden crowns, badges of courage and honor given you by me. Any one of us who was killed, who met a glorious end, we buried with full honors. Many now stand immortalized by bronze statues in Macedonia. Their families are honored and pay no taxes. Under my command, not one man has been killed fleeing the enemy.
Alexander's voice rises now. The catalogue of sacrifice becomes a weapon, every sentence a hammer blow, and then comes the devastating final strike.
And now I wanted to send back some of you who've been wounded or crippled or have grown old to be welcomed back home as heroes. But since you all wish to go, then all of you, go. Go home and tell them that your king, Alexander, conqueror of the Persians, Medes, Bactrians, and Scythians, who now rules over the Parthians, Chorasmians, and Hyrcanians as far as the Caspian Sea, who's marched over the mountains of the Hindu Kush, crossed the Oxus and Tanais rivers, even the Indus, the first to cross it since Dionysus himself. I would have crossed the Hyphasis too if you hadn't cowered in fear, who sailed into the great sea from the mouth of the Indus, crossed the desert of Gedrosia, where no one had ever led an army, who took Carmenia, while my fleet sailed the Persian Gulf. When you get home, you tell them that when you made it back to Susa, you abandoned him and went home, leaving him under the protection of the foreigners you'd conquered. Perhaps this report of yours will seem glorious in the eyes of men and worthy in the eyes of the gods. Be gone.
Alexander doesn't wait for a response. He leaps down from the platform and disappears into his royal tent. And then, nothing. Silence. Absence. The king who has always been among them, bleeding with them, fighting with them, simply vanishes. For one day, the Macedonians stand in confusion. Then, 2 days. Alexander refuses to see anyone. Not his companions, not his generals, not the men who followed him since the beginning. And in that absence, fear begins to spread. What have they done? On the 3rd day, Alexander makes his move. Word spreads through the camp like wildfire. The king is appointing Persians to command positions. Persians are being named to Macedonian units. The companion cavalry, that sacred brotherhood of Macedonian nobility, is being opened to Persians. There's a Persian squadron of silver shields now. Persian kinsmen have the right to kiss the king. The psychological warfare is devastating. The Macedonians wanted to be valued, to be essential. Now they're being replaced completely. The message is brutal and clear. Alexander doesn't need them. He never did. Panic sets in. The realization hits them with the force of a cavalry charge. They've destroyed everything with their pride. The Macedonians break. In a mass movement of desperate men, they run to the royal quarters. They throw down their weapons at the doors, the ancient gesture of supplication. They're not warriors now. They're beggars. They shout to be let in. They promise to hand over anyone responsible for the mutiny. They swear they won't leave, day or night, until Alexander forgives them. Proud men, scarred veterans, men who've conquered empires, now stand weeping outside their king's tent like children abandoned by their father. When Alexander hears of their anguish, he emerges quickly, and when he sees them, broken and humble, their faces wet with tears, something inside him breaks too. The anger that sustained him for 3 days dissolves. He begins to cry. The conqueror who never showed weakness stands before his men with tears streaming down his face. An old cavalry commander named Kalline steps forward. His voice shakes as he speaks. "Sire, what grieves the Macedonians is that you have already made some Persians your kinsmen, and the Persians are called kinsmen of Alexander and are allowed to kiss you, while not one of the Macedonians has been granted this honor. It's not about Persia. It's not about the successors. It's about love, about belonging, about being family." And in that moment, Alexander understands. He interrupts Kalline's mid-sentence. "I make you all my kinsmen, and henceforward that shall be your title." The dam breaks. Kalline steps forward and kisses Alexander, then another man, then another. One by one, those who wish to embrace their king do so. Tears mix with laughter. Weapons are picked up again, not in rebellion but in joy. The camp erupts with shouts and victory songs. Alexander arranges a massive banquet. 9,000 guests. He sits at the center, Macedonians around him in the inner circle, Persians in the ring beyond, representatives of all the empire's peoples in the outer rings. Greek priests and Persian magi lead the ceremonies together. Everyone draws wine from the same great bowl. Everyone pours the same libations. And then Alexander does something revolutionary. He prays aloud before gods and men for harmony and partnership in rule between Macedonians and Persians. Not domination, partnership. It's a vision that transcends conquest, that reimagines what empire could mean. The song of victory that rises from 9,000 throats echoes across the Tigris River. The sound of an army reborn, the sound of a king who broke his men and remade them, the sound of history turning on a single moment of terrible, beautiful truth. This is the brutal truth of leadership. Alexander didn't just conquer with swords, he conquered with words, with psychology, with the raw force of his will. The Opus mutiny could have ended his empire. Instead, it became the moment that defined what made Alexander truly great. If this story moved you, subscribe to Wars in History right now. We bring you the most intense, dramatic, and authentic stories from military history. Hit that like button, drop a comment telling us what you think of Alexander's leadership, and check out our video on Caesar's greatest battle next. This is Wars in History, where we never back down from the hard questions. See you in the next one.